All right, good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. My name is Mark Schulstrom, Senior Director of Customer Support and Hosting here at Amtech. We're happy to have you with us. What promises to be an engaging and informative discussion about cybersecurity. I'm pleased to introduce our moderator for today, Bill Warner, who's the SVP of Customer Operations at Amtech. And Bill will be guiding us through this conversation, ensuring we cover all the key aspects of this critical topic. I'm also excited to introduce our guest speaker, Felix Vargas, CTO of Security at AHEAD, which is one of our security and strategic hosting partners. Felix brings a wealth of knowledge and experience in cybersecurity, and we're fortunate to have him with us today. Before we get started, I just wanted to go through a few housekeeping items. Throughout the webinar, please feel free to log your questions in the questions area on the side panel. We'll address as many of them as possible during the Q&A section, which will be done at the end. Additionally, for those of you who may need to step away or want to revisit the content, a recording will be available by the end of the week. So without further ado, I'll hand it over to Bill. So Bill, you want to go ahead and get us started?
Yeah, absolutely. I appreciate it, Mark. So yeah, first off, guys, I think you can probably, yeah, you can stop sharing your screen, Mark. So first off, guys, good morning, good afternoon, depending upon what time zone you're in. Really appreciate you investing a little bit of time today, right? To be clear, this is intended to be an educational session or informational session. This isn't us selling anything. This is us trying to, help our customers really just ensure that they're operating their businesses securely and thinking about things they should to minimize things that could impact your business that may be out of your control. So as Mark talked about, I'm really excited to have Felix Vargas with us today. So Felix is with AHEAD, a key strategic partner of really a long time partner of Amtech, supporting us as with our hosting services customers. So Felix, first off, thanks for joining today. Good to see you again. And look, as we get started, maybe the best place to start is, right, if just talk to us a little bit about your background, what your role is at AHEAD, and so people can understand, like, I'm very comfortable, like, you're definitely an expert in this field, but like, I know people would like to understand the kind of your credentials coming into this conversation.
Oh, definitely. First of all, thank you, Mark and Bill, for having me. Amtech and AHEAD are long-standing partners, right? And it's a relationship that we value. And honestly, I'm very passionate about conversations like this because it brings awareness to cybersecurity, which is something that is very important and an important focus point of our team as a whole. So by way of background, I've been in the technology space for over a decade, wearing many hats. I started taking apart devices in my house, breaking them, fixing them, very curious. As I got started in my career, I've had stints at VMware for 4 years, wearing many hats there as well. I currently lead the security engineering team at AHEAD, and I focus on the security go-to-market, which means I talk to CISOs every day, understanding exactly what the challenges are across all verticals. And what I do is I curate our services to help meet those and address those challenges, as well as the vendors that we integrate with and what aspects of what we provide we shift into a managed services type of role. So dedicated to cybersecurity, passionate about it, and sort of happy to be here and have this conversation.
That's awesome. That's awesome.
Yeah.
And look, one of the things I realized as I've gotten to know you a little bit, right? One of the things I failed to ask, everybody's got their story, right? So how did you get into this, right? Because one of the things that has struck me since I've known you is you are tremendously passionate about this. So that's usually driven by something. So how did you get into this industry, this space?
Right. I mean, technology, it's always been a passion of mine, right? So I've always been some sort of architect, like I stated, whether it's network, backup, et cetera, right? Covering the gamut from an IT perspective. And in cybersecurity, how I got into cybersecurity was interesting. It was due to an outage. And previous to that, I was involved in cybersecurity, but not to this level. I had cybersecurity responsibilities. We embed cybersecurity into everything. When I was in DevOps, it was around shifting left, and securing the CI/CD process, right? That was before I really got into cybersecurity. So you know, my involvement in cybersecurity is longstanding, but where I really sort of got passionate about cybersecurity dates back to 5 years ago, when a customer of ours, a partner of ours that we worked with, and we did all of their data center equipment, whether it's networking, compute, storage, virtualization. We were responsible, you know, for that equipment. And there was a ransomware outage, and this was the hospital, right? And I remember driving to the National Mall. I live in Potomac, Maryland, 10 minutes outside of the DC area. And I remember on December 6th of that year, I was driving my family to the National Mall, and I get a frantic call from a colleague of mine saying that the hospital was down, and that moreover, there were 6 newborns that were in the NICU that were being monitored, and the fetal heart rate monitor application, which is Windows-based, was down. And our goal was our task was to try to recover it. Now, this organization had already reached out to cyber insurance, the cyber insurance providers, connected them with an incident response provider that was very focused on really making sure that the cyber insurance provider was writing the right check, not necessarily recovering the systems. So I turned my car around and headed home, and what we tried to do for the next 12 days was recover these fetal heart rate monitors. They deployed the National Guard, so they had 3 8-hour shifts of nurses that were staring at newborns, and there was an escalation protocol to get help involved if there were signs that the newborns were in distress. And for the first time in my life, I realized that, you know, cybersecurity and IT in general, because they're, you know, very tied together, right? You know, it involves lives, right? And there is a human element to cybersecurity, and that immediately from that day forward, all we did was focus on cybersecurity, right? I really started with lessons learned, what happened within this organization. How do we always say there's a boom, right, when something takes place, and there's a left of boom, things that we could have done that were preventative, and right of boom, things that we could have done to improve our detection process. So we sort of gathered a perspective there, and we went to each one of our customers looking to educate, similarly to what we're doing now, on what are the best practices, what we should do, you know, what should we not do, and things of that nature. So ever since then, it's been all cybersecurity for me, and I wouldn't have it any other way.
That's awesome. I appreciate that. That gives us all a little perspective, right, on the importance of that. Definitely appreciate you sharing. So Felix, look, we've probably got, you know, the full spectrum of experience and exposure on this call in terms of our customers, right? And you're obviously familiar with our industry, having been part of our, you know, having the relationship between Amtech and Head that we've had for so long. But recognize, again, we probably got different levels of expertise and experience. Maybe we just start with a simple question, right? When we hear the term cyber event or cyber attack, like, what does that mean, right? You know, maybe a little bit of a softball question for you to get us going of like, what is a cyber event mean?
Right, and so the two are a bit different. A cyber event is practically, in its simplest term, anything that a security operations center would have to investigate. So these are things that maybe they're not anomalous, that they're, you know, to some degree normal, maybe not at that particular time. There are, you know, things that are concerning, like malware, and all of these things sort of lead to some sort of investigation, and that investigation either comes back with various conclusions. Either this is okay, it's not any, we don't really have to take action, all the way to there's a ransomware attack actually currently happening that we're looking to sort of stop. So it covers the gamut, and, you know, I got to say, most organizations, you know, that are north of 1,000 endpoints generally get 1,000 of these events a day, right? So there's an overwhelming amount of events that take place, and our ability to discern what's actionable or not is our biggest challenge, right? That context. But that's how I would define that, right? In its simplest term. Now we can go very deep there, but in its simplest term that's how I would define it.
Just maybe a little bit of a follow-up on that. Use the term endpoint, right? And for companies who have maybe over 1,000 endpoints, right, what in the manufacturing space, what what is an endpoint? What are some examples of endpoints?
Right. An endpoint is anything that is running an operating system of some sort, right? That we have to be responsible for, whether it's availability, whether it's from a cybersecurity perspective, in general, right? So these are your laptops, your server workloads, your physical workloads running in the plant and manufacturing space, anything that has an operating system that could be exposed by a threat actor, right? And again, one of the biggest challenges is understanding what those are. So it's a really good question, because oftentimes we actually don't know, right, what our assets are and where our data is, and where our risk is, right? And so it's an important sort of conversation to get a good understanding of what you're securing.
Okay.
And endpoints are a big part of that.
Okay. So as we think about this, and I was doing a little bit of reading yesterday, and granted there's statistics all over the place, but one of the statistics I'd seen is, from 2021 to 2023, I think it was something like cyber attacks had increased 72%, right? Literally in those 2 years. And that even sounds conservative to me.
Right.
But
yep.
When we think about, you said risks, right? We talked about endpoints. As you think about, if you're that bad actor, right? Are there certain profiles of a company, or there certain profiles of an industry that those bad actors are kind of looking for and saying like, hey, that's a prime target for us to go after?
Right. And the thing is that I always use the example of just regular criminals, right? So if you ask that of regular criminals, it just depends on the profile of criminal, right? So us doing threat intel and better understanding what the threat actor profile is goes a long way as far as protecting ourselves and what industry they're attacking. So I'm very big into threat intel and having the intelligence and understanding the risk to determine where you're most susceptible to an attack. But I will say there are three main profiles for threat actors, right? The first is nation state, which we hear of a lot. Obviously, when there's conflict at the international level, there's always an element of that's always happening. You always hear China and Russia and those sort of countries. Then there's the hacktivists that have sort of an agenda and it's sometimes politically driven and are looking to promote that agenda, right? And so we see that often as well. And then we also see criminal actors who are just looking for dollars and cents, right? They're looking to make money off of the of what's happening, right? And so those individuals are equal opportunity threat actors, right? And so most of the time, most of the attacks come from criminal actors, regardless of the vertical. So if you think of the mind of a criminal, it covers the gamut. And part of what we're seeing now, right, is that the reason why the criminal actors are continuing to do what they're doing is because we're paying them and we can't prosecute them, right? The reason why we can't prosecute them is because they're generally in Russia, right? A lot of the threat actors that we're hearing about, whether it's Scattered Spider or et cetera, they're out of Russia, and what they've done is they've created a business to help enable other criminals. So you might think that a criminal on the other end is incredibly sophisticated and they're very technical. In some cases they're not, and what they're doing is there's this now industry of ransomware as a service where they're going into an organization that has those individuals, and these organizations are ran like incredibly well-run organizations that have optimal customer service, and they're servicing criminals that aren't as sophisticated to run these attacks, right? So then, and then on top of it, we're paying them. So it's becoming a very interesting business model for folks in countries where we can't prosecute them, and the government there is not necessarily doing anything about that. They're not doing anything to sort of help out. They're turning their back, saying, "Oh, we don't know. We don't really know what's going on." So and because of that, those numbers are increasing, right? And we're seeing more and more. And even in my situation, right, the threat actor that affected that hospital was eGregor. That company is a ransomware as a service company. And when we reached out, Interpol got involved, and it's crazy when you're in an incident, right? Interpol has a credit rating for all the threat actors, and if you're going to pay them, they tell you whether you should or not, because if you pay them, they may not give you not help you decrypt your environment and get your data back.
Right.
And so there's a credit rating, and so when we reached out, eGregor said we don't do hospitals. this is one of our potential customers that did this, that is using our ransomware as a service platform to go after other sort of organizations. So that's a long-winded way of saying, you know, everyone is a threat, right? Is a potential target to one of these cybersecurity incidents, and profiling these threat actors, now that this has been democratized, right, from the complexity has been extracted, is quite the challenge, which is why threat intel is so important.
Yeah, you know, I'm sorry, as you're talking there, I know you travel a lot. I certainly travel a lot, and I think it was, I don't know, a month ago. I apologize to the Jason Statham fans on the phone, but right, the Beekeeper, right?
Yeah.
I don't know if you've seen that movie, but one of the things I was struck, it's exactly what you're talking about. Their level of customer service, top notch. Couldn't have been more friendly to the people that they were going after, you know, how to pay, the follow-up, and candidly, we've even seen on our side with some of our customers or in our industry who we interact with who have had this happen, and the communications they get from those bad actors are wonderful, right? Top-notch customer service, couldn't be friendlier. So it's clearly it's clearly a business.
Right, and I mean, these organizations have human resources departments.
Yeah.
They have DIY initiatives. Like it's just getting out of control, right? With the level of organization that they run and the level of service that they provide once they perform one of these acts, because they want to get paid, right? If you pay them, they're going to provide good customer service, and it's just
That's nuts. That's nuts.
Yeah, it's crazy.
Yeah. Well, so if we bring it back a little bit to our industry specifically, right? So we have, you know, one of the, you know, if we think about how our customers have their IT infrastructure set up, right? It's a mix of some who are being hosted, whether by us or an alternate third party, and in some cases we have customers who are managing their IT all on premise, right? They're you know, taking that path. So if, as you think about it, and based on your familiarity with, you know, with the industry, are there advantages and disadvantages, if you will, as we think about secure, as it, you know, applies to security, of being in the cloud versus, you know, in on-premise, you know, strategy?
Yes. No. So first and foremost, sort of blanket statement, there are more advantages than there are disadvantages for being in the cloud. And a lot of that comes from the overhead that you would have to you know, undergo to manage these applications, right? So if you think about the physical aspect of data centers, the storage, the network, the virtualization, the middleware, the operating system, right, all the way up to the data and how we access the data, is you're sort of shifting to the cloud to some degree. You're shifting some of that responsibility to another organization, right, which allows you to move more leanly, right, and you have more resources and decrease your overhead and the cost associated with sort of managing those devices, and in some cases securing those aspects of an application. So lots of benefits also from a scalability perspective, right, as we look to scale an application, right, being beholden to, you know, storage device, and now we have to add this to, right, or a networking or fabric that we have to scale, right, to allow for access. A lot of those things go away, right? However, there's maybe a false sense of security that now the data itself and the identity and access management and the data loss prevention and all the aspects that are still very important, the detection and response elements of cybersecurity are not our responsibility, and that's where we sort of, you know, start getting off on the wrong foot. And it's very important for us to understand that shared responsibility of a cloud provider and a customer, and there's a lot of collaboration that happens across all of these things, right? And it's important to bring awareness to that. Especially like you stated, you know, the cybersecurity incidents since 2021 have increased. A lot of that is, listen, you know, we're largely in a work from home environment. In any sort of industry where you're remote, right, and you're sort of accessing resources, you know, regardless of where you are, whether you're at home, on the road, there's a device and you're accessing backend resources, right? you're gonna have to have the secure environments in order to sort of do that, and you're gonna have to scale those environments. So bringing those services closer to the customers and then securing them is the way to go. But let's not forget that we also have to secure those resources, right? So lots of benefits, but things to be aware of as well, right? So, and this is a topic that we spend quite a lot of time with our customers on is, what is our responsibility? What is your responsibility? And for the things that are our responsibilities, can you help us? Can we collaborate on strategies to better secure our data and our applications?
Okay. So maybe to build on that a little bit, where I recognize there's not this hard line between, hey, if you're in the cloud, what we do, and then what you do locally, right? There's, I say blended, that's not the right term, but there tends to be, and I think we've even talked about this and seen some graphics around it of, right, even in that hosted model, what are the elements that the local team still needs to be conscious of, right? And going back to your comment about endpoints, right? The endpoints are still local, right? They're not in the cloud. So where do you, maybe if you can dig a little bit deeper on where you see, let's use the example of a hosted environment, where you start to see the lines of, hey, this is what we're going to take care of, but look, this is still something that you as that customer needs to be mindful of.
Sure, and it's important to break it into a couple categories. So if we look at what hosted means in general, right, you have infrastructure as a service, right? You have platform as a service, and you have software as a service, right? Software as a service is off and to the right, right? And it provides the highest level of flexibility, right? And so things like networking, operating system, middleware, the app itself, the infrastructure, all of that is taken care of from a software as a service perspective. Now, and I'm just talking about the application itself. Now, within that application, there's data, right? Where the customer of that SaaS service is still responsible for. And then there's also identity and access management that is also part of that. Who can access that application, right? Now, the other side of that is all of the assets, endpoints included, right, that would interface with that application, right? Because if I am on my own device and I have an iPhone, if I'm on this iPhone and I access that application, but I'm running malware on this device, I could affect that application, right? And then all of the sudden, right, there is some sort of event that we would have to investigate to see is this something that is actionable? Is there some sort of incident happening that is actionable? And so I am very passionate about something called cyber asset attack surface management, right? So we're shifting to an identity-based security model. We're shifting our perspective to where the endpoints reside, regardless of where that is. Having an understanding of what our assets are and their security posture is very important, and things like zero trust that come up a lot around least privilege access, right? If I am user A, I should only have access to these three things because that is my role, right, within the organization. And beyond that, there's going to be conditional based access. If in case there is some sort of malware on this device, maybe I don't have access for that time period until that malware is removed, and that is something that I collaborate with IT on re-imaging that device or getting rid of the malware. But there's a lot to be said around the attack surface as a whole, and not just focusing on the app itself and where it runs. The castle and moat approach for cybersecurity has long been retired, right? And we're really in a mobile identity-based world where our devices and our identities are critical to our success from a cybersecurity perspective.
So let me ask you, you brought up the term zero trust, right? We hear more and more about that. Can you just dig a little bit deeper and like help us understand what is, layman's terms, right? What does zero trust mean?
Right. So zero trust has three guiding principles. And I will say, listen, there is no vendor that will zero trust you or, it's a security strategy. It's a way of looking at security, right? That is rooted in continual improvement, right? And there has 3 guiding principles. The first is verify explicitly. The second is least privilege access. And the third is assume breach, right? So let's double click on the first, verify explicitly. What that means is it's not just your password that I'm concerned with, Bill, right? I understand that you have your password. I understand that you just, did an MFA authentication, but where are you in the world, right? What is the context of your access? What device are you on? What is the posture of that device, right? And based on all that information, I'm going to establish a risk profile for you at that time. I'm going to say, well, Bill is risky or he's not risky. And then I'm going to provide least privilege access to what you are allowed to have access to based on your risk level, right? And then the assume breach part is interesting. What you want to do is assume the network is bad, right? That we're already infiltrated, so make sure we have locks and all the doors are closed and we can't move laterally, right? Like, for example, if we're in an office together, there is no reason why my laptop and your laptop, Bill, should be able to communicate, right? There's no reason for that, right? But most of the time, that's how it works. My laptop and your laptop can communicate. And so that shouldn't be the case because all our communication is centrally governed by some application. If we're exchanging files, it goes through Office 365. If we need to, there's SharePoint involved. And so that is a very simple example of least privilege access. These 2 things should not talk. Do we have a way of controlling that, a control that will help to satisfy that? But again, zero trust is an overarching security strategy. It's a sort of a maturity model, that says we want to verify explicitly, we want to provide least privilege access, and we also want to assume breach. There is a framework that we use around it. It's a CISA zero trust maturity model. If you want to learn more, you can, feel free to Google that, and it'll give you some perspective on what maturity looks like within zero trust. But it's very rooted in those 3 guiding principles that I mentioned.
Okay. Yeah, and look, one of we're cybersecurity, obviously, for our customers, but even within our own business, for our internal folks, is something we're very focused on. And as you talked about the geographical location, one of the things we run into, I'll say monthly, it may even happen more, is somebody goes out of country on vacation, and at some point they're trying to log in from a country that we don't recognize. That, hey, why are you in Nicaragua or whatever it might be? And inevitably they can't get in because it doesn't think, why is that laptop or why is that endpoint trying to get in from a country that we don't know Bill is, we think Bill's still in Atlanta, Georgia, right? So we, totally recognize that.
And in some cases, that's the impossible travel scenario, right? And there are certain countries that you shouldn't have access from, like usually on the top of that list is China or Russia, right? Like no connections coming unless you do business there. That's different, and then there are policies that you could have around that. But yes, right, where you are geographically located and how long it took you. Is it possible for you to have gotten there since the last time you tried to access 6 minutes ago in the US, and now you're somewhere in Russia? Probably not, or somewhere anywhere else, right? It doesn't necessarily have to be in any one of those countries, but there is some sort of perspective there around impossible travel that is important as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So look, I recognize this could be a very broad answer because there's a ton of tentacles to it. But as we just think about I'll use the term baseline measures, right? I'm a business owner, right? I've got my plant, right? Maybe I am hosted, maybe I'm not. Like, what are the baseline measures that I just want to ensure we're doing as an organization, right? To do our best to shore up our operations from an attack from those bad actors. What are some of the things that table stakes that you guys go in as you're meeting with customers and recommend every single time, and or kind of see that it's table stakes, but most companies don't do it, and they need to do it?
No, for sure. It's such a great question, and it's very broad, and but it's important, right? I always recommend that most organizations should pick some sort of framework to help guide their security strategy. Now, that could be zero trust, that could be NIST CSF, which is very popular as well, and more of a legacy framework that a lot of security organizations use. And it's actually perfect to answer this question, the NIST CSF. What you really want to do is you start with identify, right? And so, and there are 5 main categories here. It's identify, there's protect, there's detect, there's respond, and then there's recover, right? Those are the 5 sort of categories, and it tells a pretty sort of compelling story as you go through them. But the first is identify. Where is my risk, right? What is the impact to the business if, right? What am I securing? Do I have good asset management for the assets that I'm responsible for, right? What are my gaps, right? If I conduct a gap assessment in the identify phase, it'll tell me where am I at today? Where do I want to be? What's the risk level that is tolerable for my organization? And what is the roadmap around improving, right? And sort of getting those addressed, or filling those gaps in a programmatic way that is multi-year. So always start with that identify phase, which is in some ways aligned to advisory in general, advisory services where somebody will come and tell you, hey, here's what's wrong. A lot of what we see there is, there are regulatory compliance elements that are part of that. Hey, did I pass an assessment for this particular regulatory compliance requirement, right? Things of that nature, and that'll help shape all of what I'm about to say. So without that, it's hard to do anything because what you're doing may be in contradiction of what you need, right? And so you want to make sure that you have that strategy set out. Also, there's pen testing also that you hear a lot about. Pen test, think of it, for those that don't know, as a stress test on your security posture, right? What assets do you have that are publicly available? Am I able to infiltrate them? Or we can start internally and try to move laterally, right, in a way to sort of help uncover some challenges. So all of these sort of assessments and what we call red team pen testing assessments help to create that sort of roadmap and give you some perspective. Then we get into the protect phase. The protect phase is when you're actually going to do something, right? And some low-hanging fruit things that we all should have: comprehensive multi-factor authentication, right? So I can't tell you, the hospital event that we had, somebody clicked on a link and there wasn't multi-factor authentication on Active Directory for domain admin accounts. That would have stopped the whole attack, by the way, right? Also, endpoint detection and response, right? Those are things, in the protect phase that are just very popular, right? That you should do, even for cyber insurance. Very strong requirements around this, right? Having an agent running on this endpoint that understands the threat actors, the malware, right, and anomalous behavior that is happening, right? Think of this as a DVR. It's not only looking for known bats, but it's recording everything that is happening. So in case I need to do an investigation, I can go back and figure out where it happened. There's also the protection element. Do I have backups? Are they offsite immutable backups, right? What is that sort of perspective as well? And so there's a lot in the protect phase, but those are some common elements that we see. And then as we move to the detect is, if I have all these things in place, how am I aggregating the information that is coming from them to discern if something were to happen, if an event actually took place? Because you asked a question about an event or an attack. Sometimes there are events that go unnoticed because we don't have visibility. I'll use my house as an example. If I don't have a camera in my backyard and I don't lock my door, somebody can walk right in and I won't know, right? And so if I don't have the right control, the right detection element looking for these things, I won't know that they're happening, and thus I won't know that they're being investigated. So there's a part of not having visibility, and there's also a part of having visibility but being overwhelmed with the amount of information that is coming and knowing what is actionable and what isn't, right? So there's a lot of different perspectives to that detect phase. And so respond is more specific to what is the response, right? And do I have, right? And this is where AI plays a big role in cybersecurity, is how can we more effectively respond to these attacks as they're coming in? Currently, the mean time to detection is 200 days. So it's taken us 200 days to detect something that is within our walls. In the case of the hospital that I told you about, it was 269 days where they didn't know they had been, but on average, it's 200 days, and then it's taken us 77 days to respond, right? To isolate the endpoint, or conduct our investigation and come up with an action, right? And the last, and certainly not least is recover. What I'm about to say, I can't say enough, because the number one finding that we had from that incident and many others that you're going to see, it's not if, it is when, and you need to have proper recovery controls in place, offsite immutable backups, infrastructure to restore to, all these things that are important. Conduct tabletop exercises as well. When something goes wrong, who does what? We're all sitting at the table having a conversation around who's responsible for what and what aspects of recovery. We understand the context of our tier 1 applications and how we're going to recover them, right? If we have, for example, in the case of the hospital, the fetal heart rate monitors, there were 12 VMs. The organization didn't know the dependency for that application and didn't know those 12 elements. It took us quite a while to get to that point where we understood, here are the 12 things that we have to recover, right? And so when you think about recovery, you need to think about that. What is the lifeblood of your business, and what are your recovery processes that you have in place in order to effectively recover that? And as you go back, right, again, identify, protect, detect, respond, and recover. In the identify phase, we need to understand, right, as we do business impact analysis, as we do risk assessments, we understand what these critical assets are, these critical applications, and that should help shape the protect, the detect, the respond, and the recover. It should be prioritized based on that context.
Okay. So let me double click into one of the numbers you gave, because I wrote it down because I hadn't heard it before. You talked about, on average, north of 200 days to detect something. So does that essentially mean, hey, somebody's infiltrated me in theory 6.5 months ago, and it takes me 6.5 months to know that they've been sitting there, right? Kind of with bad intentions.
Right, several months, 100%. And part of the challenge is, again, if we think about it, most organizations, right, have a castle and moat approach where, the perimeter security is very important. And we're shifting away from this largely. COVID helped a great deal, right? To change our perspective, because we were what, 60%, 5% work from home pre-COVID. Now we're 60% work from home post-COVID, right? So that helped, bring this fact, to the forefront. But most organizations have this sort of castle and moat approach where if someone were to gain access, and again, this is where zero trust makes a lot of sense. The network is bad, right? We start moving laterally and all doors are open, right? And so it's important for us to have not only the controls where the doors are closed, meaning two resources that have no business communicating shouldn't have ports open or doors open for them to communicate, but also, do we have the ability of understanding anomalous behavior, right? Something that isn't right, even though we have everything, we have least privilege everywhere, but do you know what normal looks like? And are you able to detect a deviation from normal that will lead to a security event that we talked about where we're going to investigate, right? And say, hey, what happened and where, and this person was here, and then this happened, and you're able to correlate all of that, right? So that's a main challenge of all of this is having that potential context, and without that, the numbers run high. You don't know when you're affected, and normally what happens is these threat actors, they'll send out phishing emails, you'll click on a link, and they'll be in your environment dormant, right? And then what ends up happening is the ransomware as a service organization says, we have these many customers that you could potentially execute this on. So the price gets a little higher for them because now they have, actual customers that they have infiltrated where they don't want to sort of deal with the minutia of it, and then they sell that as well. So it's interesting, right? And I would say that also the controls that we have for admins, this is something that is missed often, is that we have MFA for external users. Most do. If you're getting on Office 365, you should, right? Or any sort of SaaS application as a whole. But then do we have multi-factor authentication, strong passwords, all these fundamental elements for internal, the pseudo accounts, the admin accounts that have, superpowers within the organization, how are we controlling those accounts? So we have privilege access management, and,
Sure.
and those are the ones that these threat actors are looking for as they're moving laterally, right? It's elevated privileges. Get on an endpoint, elevate privileges, and go, right? And again, hackers, and I always say this, they're not breaking in, they're logging in.
Mhm.
Right?
Yeah.
So hopefully that answers your question.
No, it does. It does. And look, this has been phenomenal. I appreciate you putting up with my questions. I guess I'm going to turn it back to Mark here in a second because I know we've got some questions from the audience. But maybe real quickly, obviously I know you guys ahead does this every single day, right? Working with customers and providing guidance. But is there anything that if folks want to learn more, like just can you point us in the direction of different resources that might be helpful, or maybe even talk to the things you guys do with customers on a day in, day out basis?
Yeah, so as far as resources, TechCrunch is a huge resource, for me, as far as just gaining insights into what's happening in the cybersecurity landscape. There are various podcasts out there that are very helpful, and that give you some context around. If you want to know the minutia of what happens in the world of cybersecurity, they really do a good job of giving you, hey, this is what happened with the casino that was hacked, right? And this is the SIM swapping, and it's a really cool story. As far as things that we do, there are webinars that we host similar to this one that are rooted in the fundamental aspects of cybersecurity that we want folks to sort of attend and just sort of bring awareness to the best practices and ways to keep your organization secure. We also hold events, local to various sort of markets where you can come on. We provide, food and entertainment, and then we also give these talks around, hey, here's how to best secure your environment. Sometimes we make those vertical specific, right, and say, here's based on your vertical and the challenges that you have, right? Here are the elements that would be interesting to you. But those are a few ideas. Always, social media, we're very active. Ahead, has an active social media presence. So please follow us so you get more insights into how we're helping organizations. And you can reach out to me directly, right? I'm fairly active and, happy to engage and, answer questions or have just conversations as a whole around cybersecurity.
Excellent. Felix, I really appreciate it. So Mark, if you're around, we're going to bring you back in. I think you've been monitoring the questions that have come in. I don't know if you want to share a couple of those I think we've got about 15 minutes or so, 10, 15 minutes that we can probably get through a few questions.
Yeah, absolutely. It says, I heard you mention cyber insurance. We are a smaller independent plant. Is this something we should have, or is this more important for larger facilities?
Everyone should have cyber insurance, right? All organizations that are susceptible to a cyber security attack, and great question. And I will say that we have a program focused on helping organizations get the right level of cyber insurance, because that's another challenge that we have is that, think of it like Florida, right? When a hurricane happens and there are a lot of claims coming in, what happens to the coverage? The premiums, they increase. But oftentimes, individuals, and in this case, organizations, don't have the context to sort of fight back and say, this is what we need, this is how we need it based on our risk level, this is what we're willing to accept. So short answer is yes, 100%. And, we can certainly help make sense of that world and make sure that you're properly covered. And another, just while we're on that question, because this is very important, incident response retainer is almost just as important because, and I didn't necessarily double click this on the hospital incident, but when the hospital called cyber insurance had their own incident response folks that came in, and there was a legal hold on everything. So if you think about recovering, you're going to want to restart things or move things around. We couldn't restart any systems. So we had to build an isolated recovery environment in order to restore to that wasn't on legal hold because of cyber insurance and the incident response organization that they're in contract with. So no matter where you go, if you go to AIG and you go to their website, there's a list of incident response providers that you're able to call. they're all collaborating, right? And so I always advocate for your own representation as it relates to incident response. Get an incident response retainer so that you have your own folks to call to help and assist with your recovery efforts. And guess what? They're going to collaborate with the incident response representation that the cyber insurance provider is, has provided. So just food for thought. Yes, cyber insurance, and also incident response retainer that is specific to the customer, not the cyber insurance provider.
Great. Another one, we've been starting to use AI more in our facilities, especially on our personal machines. What's your perspective on AI and security?
Wow. So that's a very long conversation. We have hours long workshops on this, but it's a very important sort of perspective. I'll say that AI has been around for a long time. I think that the birth of generative AI, where we now have these large language models that we could use for, it's an application of human behaviors, how I like to call it, whether good or bad. So what you're seeing is an increase in sort of attacks, sophisticated attacks, right? Where you had a prince from Nigeria that couldn't spell. Now he is he is a PhD in writing phishing emails, right? And so now our sort of tools have to get better at fighting off these sort of incidents. And so there's a lot of AI that is now being embedded. You fight AI with AI, right? So the vendor ecosystem is just increasing in sort of AI capabilities to meet the sophistication of the attacks that are coming in. So that's one perspective of it, is the actual number of attacks and the sophistication. The other perspective is also how are we using it for to increase our ability to respond to a security incident. So there's a lot there as far as the security analyst. One stat that I always mention that I haven't yet is that there is roughly 400,000 unfilled cybersecurity positions in the US alone. There's millions globally, right? And the reason for that is we have a massive skills gap that we're not going to fill by hiring, right? We need to democratize cybersecurity as much as possible. We are all responsible for cybersecurity. Everyone on this call, when you click on a link and you understanding if it's a bad email, that is all our responsibility, and that's generally sort of how they get in. So there's an aspect to this that we're going to use AI to help curb that. We're going to orchestrate, automate, and leverage AI to decrease the burdens of us having to find resource and upskilling them. And so there's a lot of neat things that are happening where I can quickly check where a potential threat actor is within my environment and what is the remediation associated with that threat actor, right? And simplifying the job of a security analyst substantially. That's one aspect of it. And the other is governing how we use AI in our day-to-day, right? I use ChatGPT, right? I think it's a very important tool. However, that's also a vector, an attack vector for folks to gain access, and for us to have what we call shadow IT, where we're copying employee data into a third party without having the visibility or the controls of that third party. And so there's a lot around making sure that we're communicating what the policy is to employees, and having proper controls around what generative AI applications whether they're sanctioned or unsanctioned can be used, and what controls do we have at getting visibility into what is being done, right? There's a lot in the prompt visibility space. If I write a prompt, is that an okay prompt? Is it not? Can I copy things into it? So there's controls that we can have. But again, you don't have that visibility until you have this comprehensive approach, right? Again, let's prioritize where the risk is, but those are the three main elements. Again, like the first one is the sophistication of the attacks. The second one is our ability to use AI to improve our security response. And the third is governing responsible or enabling responsible, secure use of AI, of ChatGPT or generative AI as a whole within the organizations.
Can you explain the difference between EDR and XDR?
Right. So that's a good one. So here's the deal, right? So EDR, endpoint detection and response, is there's a graduation to a concept that was EPP. So if you think about EPP or antivirus, Symantec, for example, and various other sort of vendors, historical, that are just looking at AV, they're just looking for known bads, right? So we start with EPP known bads. Think of it like the FBI top 10 most wanted list, right? Where you have the FBI says, hey, here are the things that are 10 things that we know are bad. If you see this person in your house, call the police, right? And so that was antivirus or endpoint protection. And so what we did is we sort of graduated to this sort of EDR perspective where that wasn't enough, because what we needed was to get a perspective on anomalous behavior. And the only way that you can get a perspective on anomalous behavior is if you understand current behavior. So then what we had to do is gather telemetry or data from all these endpoints to establish that, hey, here's what normal sort of looks like, right? And so from there, we can start detecting, 0 days, things that aren't on the FBI top 10 list that could potentially affect us, where there aren't what we call signatures for, right? Because we're looking at that anomalous behavior, right? And so what happened was that from that, there was more of an emphasis on just looking at not just the endpoint, right? So that's where XDR came in, which is extended detection and response, where if I have the visibility and all this information coming from the endpoint, how about the network? If you think about a house, it's the hallways, right? Something might be happening in a room, but what's happening in the hallway? Or what's happening on the identity? So the idea is that we create a platform that takes the data from the endpoint, that anomalous behavior. We take the data from the network, where we're also establishing a known good at the network level, and we take the data from the identity and the firewalls, and we correlate all that together, and we help facilitate the security outcome, right? So we went from EPP, which is looking at no bats, to EDR, which is endpoint, server workloads, physical workloads, to XDR, which expands our coverage beyond into other areas that are also important that we need to focus on in order to get the context that we need. Going back to what Bill said, event or attack, is this an actionable event, right? If we're doing proper correlation, then we know it's actionable, and we have the context of our tier 1 services, then we know we need to respond, right? So that's where XDR comes in. It's sort of an evolution of EDR to cover other telemetry sources that are important.
Perfect. And the last one, we're an on-prem site, but we have a lot of machines using the same shared logins because they're used by multiple people throughout the day. With us being on-prem, is that still a concern for outside threat actors?
100%, yes. It doesn't matter where you are, that we need to make sure that we have strong passwords, right? And that we have proper governance around privileged access. Lots of best practices there. So if at any point anyone is sort of sharing a password, then it makes and then on top of it, and you didn't say this in your question, but on top of it, maybe you're not the passwords aren't strong, or you're not changing them. It just makes it very easy for these criminals that you think are sophisticated, that may not be, to stumble upon your environment and move laterally, right? So we need to make it as difficult as possible, right? So everyone should have their own password, and we should have privilege access management for anything that involves elevated privileges, where you have admin access to various systems, right? So it's a best practice and something that we can shape around, again, that identify piece and say, here's something we need to improve upon, and there are maybe other things that we can sort of categorize in a prioritized manner. But 100%, I would recommend making some changes there.
Great. And that was it. Bill, did you have any questions, maybe listening through some of his question and answer sessions?
No, I was kind of chuckling at the last question, right? Because we're aware of challenges there, right? And even Felix, we're cognizant of the simplistic password strategy, which all too often is being utilized, and it just feels like that's that's an issue waiting to happen, right? It feels like so, but no other questions. Again, Felix, I want to thank you for your time. This has been phenomenal. We appreciate your time. We appreciate the ongoing partnership with Ahead, and look forward to hopefully doing more of these as we move forward.
And I also want to take this time. Thank you, Bill. Thank you, Mark. Thank you, Amtech, for being such a phenomenal partner. And thank you for everyone that joined, that listened to all this cybersecurity conversation that we had. Like I said, it's a passion of mine, ours, right? And we should really focus on democratizing cybersecurity and helping each other out as a community. And events like these go a long way towards doing that. So thank you so much for joining, and I look forward to the next conversation.
Great. Thank you, Felix. Thank you, Bill. Before we wrap, just wanted to remind everybody that we have the 2024 Amtech User Conference coming up. It's October 27th through 30th in Orlando, Florida. So if you want to register, we do have a promo code. It's cloud hosting, and you can use that to get a discount. Once again, we will have this session available, recorded, and you can check it out. It should be up by the end of the week. All right, thank you, everybody. Enjoy the rest of your day.
Awesome. Thanks. Thanks, everyone.